So what was the obviously being a Who fan is one good reason to write a book about Keith Moon, but was there anything else that kind of compelled you to write it?
Yeah, very, very much so. A lot of a lot of your listeners will have read the book, so they'll know the ending. Not just that Keith dies, but they'll know that I met him shortly before he died, and I was already an enormous Who fan, which is why I was in a room where I thought there was a chance that the Who might show up, which was the opening day of the Who's Who sort of fans exhibition at the ICA, the Institute of Contemporary Arts, in August 78. And I went on the opening day, sort of hoping that, thinking that members of the Who might show up because they were kind of band who had a connection with their fans, and Pete and Keith both did. And I met Keith there. He was really, really nice to me. And I'd already seen them at Charlton, which was the last time he ever played England in 76. And I was just like a massive fan already. And he died just like a few weeks later, just within the month. And it just stuck with me through the ensuing years that here was this man who was written into history as Moon the Loon, out of control, animal from the Muppets kind of character, total drunkard, died from an overdose of pills. And I couldn't equate that with the person who'd been so sort of gentle and sweet with me, and it basically said, oh, we'll come around and see me sometime, bring your fanzine, and we'll have a natter. And I just, as I got a bit more experience with my writing, and I had 2 books behind me that were pretty good, the Echo and the Bunnymen and the R.E.M. biographies, I just kept coming around to Keith's life story is going to be Tears of a Clown. I mean, it's just got to be. Can I write this? Am I capable of it? Do I have what it takes? And I just kept coming around to, if not me, sort of who, and if not now, when? And maybe this is the book I should set out to write. And maybe I need to take an enormous leap in my own, an enormous leap of faith in my own abilities and set out to write this book. So that's what I did.
I think I'm right in saying it took the best part of 4 years to write, including all the research involved.
Yeah, it may have only been 3. I got asked a lot as soon as it came out how long it took me to write, and I've always been a bit embarrassed by the answer because it didn't actually take that long to write. But the reason it didn't is I sort of locked myself away and did nothing else but write the book for about 9 months. I had a little kid who would have been like 2 years old when I was writing it. But I basically cut off a social life. I stopped playing football with the gang in New York. I was putting in 12-hour days and then sort of 14-hour days. And by the end of it, like 18 and 20-hour days. And I think some of that comes across. You can feel that the author is like really deep into the character, really immersed. And I've never actually done a book again like that. It was like doing a fanzine in the old days where you've got a deadline and you've got 10 pages to finish and you just know you're going to stay up all night. But it was like that for weeks upon weeks upon weeks. And after that, I kind of recognized that was like a mountain that I had climbed. And in future, I've probably gone on the wrong metaphor there, but I was going to put in like more regular work days and take the evenings to regain my sanity.
So I'm guessing it was a process that did have an effect on your mental health, because obviously you're dealing with such a complex topic and not the happiest of stories either, ultimately, I guess.
And it got less happy, Paul, as it went along. That was the problem. And unlike... I went back into similar territory with Wilson Pickett, but I was both prepared for Wilson Pickett, having written about Keith Moon, and Wilson Pickett had this sort of lovely little Renaissance redemption before he died. So he had the rise, he had the fall, and then he had a little comeback and a little a nice little period. And then unfortunately he didn't live long enough to make more of it. But with Keith, it was this gradual, almost like peaking very early, if not commercially, in his life and his happiness and his sobriety, and then just this long descent. And of course, I knew the ending. The ending is he dies, so there was no happy ending coming up. And yeah, it was definitely a difficult place to go. And if the book is all the better for that, great. But it wasn't a process that I finished Keith Moon and went, okay, what other potentially, potentially mentally, I want to use the right words here. I mean, Keith, and in modern parlance, we would all agree Keith had mental health problems. We would talk about them now. Back then, sort of saying mental meant you were totally mad, unless you were saying it in a slang way. And I guess what I'm just trying to say is I didn't want to come out of writing about Keith and his problems and say, okay, which other rock star who had enormous mental health issues should I now go and spend a similar amount of time writing about and immersing myself in? And not least because The Who was my favorite band and Keith was the character that I felt I could tell their story through, because I wanted to tell Keith's story.
Yeah. Do you feel that The Who and maybe the people connected with them, for example, the management, do you think they maybe could have done more to help Keith, I guess, through the whole time they knew him, really? As you say, nowadays we would recognize it's maybe mental health issues, but do you think they maybe could have done more, or do you think it was,
I think
I don't know.
I think yes and no. The yes side is that everybody always asks themselves, what could I have done differently? Everybody. Even if you lose a parent to illness, I mean, I think everybody's always kind of second guessing themselves. It's very hard to help people who won't help themselves. The annoying thing is that at the end, Keith was trying to help himself. And I don't hold any responsibility. I wouldn't accuse anybody around Keith that was involved in management or his bandmates or his family. Unfortunately, he'd had one falling out too many with Dougal Butler. And Dougal had saved his life a number of times. And the guy that was with him at the end, I did go back and I was looking at some of my transcripts, because I put up transcripts from the book interviews on my Substack here and there and now and then. And I was looking at what Bill Kerbishley said about this guy who was with Keith at the end. And Bill's not one to mince words. And he called him some pretty bad things. And I don't know that person well enough, but he did not have the knowledge of Keith the way that Dougal did, and he didn't probably have Keith's happiness, future, and his life, understood in a way that might have kept Keith from his final overdose. But it's still very, very difficult when somebody's used to just popping an awful lot of pills to stop them having an awful lot of pills on hand. And to that extent, it was down to Keith. One other thing I often retort with this, I feel that a lot of people tried really, really hard to keep Kurt Cobain alive. Everybody knew he had problems. Everybody knew he had heroin issues. Everybody knew he was, there was a possibility of him killing himself. They couldn't keep Kurt Cobain alive. And that was with considerable attention on doing so. And that was decades down the line. We may be at a place now where musicians are more likely to just say, I'm coming off the road. Screw you if you bought tickets. I've got a mental health issue. But in those days, it was still the first generation of rock. And there's a lot we didn't know then that we know now.